Welcome, critters! I'm Claire Jones, your devoted host of the Sacred Reading CR podcast, where we discuss and examine Critical Role episodes, plot lines, and characters and players through the lens of sacred reading practices. And this particular episode is about Campaign 1, Episode 7, Part 2. And joining me today is Petall. So glad to have you back here today.
Yeah, great to be back.
We were just talking about your purple hair before we got on, and I'm all for it.
Yes, I am very excited about it. I've been wanting to cut and re-dye my hair for ages and have only now finally been able to do it.
Yeah, I feel that so hardcore. I'm so overdue for a hair salon. All right, so I have the icebreaker today, and it is, if you could live anywhere in the world for just 1 year, where would it be?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I think I would say either LA or New York.
Wow.
Both of those seem I'm Canadian, so it's those, even though I'm right next to the States still feels like a little distant and I don't know. I just the vibe of New York seems incredible and seems like the sort of place that everybody should go at some point in their life. And LA, I just like the idea of being somewhere warm. My mood is very much affected by the weather. So being somewhere where it's more sunny than where I am now would be very beneficial for my mental health, I think.
Yeah, well, I've actually been to both places, and New York actually gets really freaking hot sometimes.
Nice.
So you can kind of get the city and the heat at the same time.
Nice.
But the subway systems get so grody when it's hot out because
I bet that seems like the sort of thing that would just
wear layers. I went there in October once and I only packed sweaters and I really regretted it. But I think I would have to say somewhere in rural, probably Scotland or Ireland.
Ooh,
somewhere
nice.
In the moors, where I could just
live
out my Sherlock Holmes cottage in the middle of nowhere, communing with the mist kind of vibe.
Yeah, that's a great vibe. I once spent a year in rural England, so not exactly the same thing, but similar. And it was a very good vibe.
Yeah, I spent 3 months in London and I really enjoyed London, but I didn't really get out into the country portion of it. And I was like, I need to make this happen at some time.
Yeah, it's very different, the big bustling city of London versus the more rural areas.
I went to Liverpool, and so I traveled through country to get there, but that's not the same.
No, not the same at all.
Yeah. All right. Well, please join us as we embark on this adventure of story analysis and self-reflection as we deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world around us via Critical Role. So as always, we love seeing your own or hearing your own insights and stories as well. So please comment, like, and subscribe. And ready? All right, let's dive in. All right, so as we open this episode, Vox Machina have just finished a bit of panic searching on the first floor of a Duergar stronghold castle, where they have successfully rescued their ally Kima. On their way to retrieve her confiscated weapons, they managed to trigger a whole bunch of traps and alert the Duergar to their presence. Before the break of the episode, they decided to recover with a short rest and a bit of healing. Before continuing on, Vex suggests that they use the less traveled staircase that they initially found when they first entered the building. So they decide to forget the search for Kima's belongings and head straight to the fight that they know is waiting for them above. So they share a drink from Grog's cask of ale together, and Scanlan proposes a plan where they disguise themselves as a pile of idiots, aka Tiberius disguised as their warrior Duergar god, sitting on top of Keyleth in beast form as a giant scorpion while the others stealth into position. Clarota and Kima agree with the plan, surprisingly. I don't think they've agreed on anything so far beyond hating each other, but they like this plan. And they all head up the hidden staircase. Vax looks for traps, successfully disarming one, and continues on before they find a row of 6 Duergar guards. Tiberius casts Watery Sphere and gathers them up in a huge watery ball, and Keyleth then casts lightning on them, taking all but one of them out, pretty impressively. So Scanlan casts Vicious Mockery to kill him off, death by shaming, our favorite approach. Tiberius casts Alter Self, Keyleth morphs into a giant scorpion, and they bust open the door into the throne room where there are 10 Duergar guards, 2 basilisks, 1 mind flayer, and a partridge in a pear tree. No, the king and the queen sitting on 2 thrones. Tiberius yells at them all very intimidatingly, I might add. Like, I was cringing throughout that entire exchange. Some of the guards do kneel in front of him, but the king yells at him back. Tiberius breathes some fire and yells some more. Vax and Vex sneak into the back of the room, and then Tiberius casts Fireball on the king, catching most of the Duergar in its radius, also including Vax. The basilisks, I hate saying that word. I hate words that has like this in it. I'm like, too many. And so the basilisks look at Tiberius and restrain him with their paralyzing eyes, paralyzing gaze, petrifying eyes, whatever you want to call it. Then they all roll initiative. Vax kicks it off by stabbing the mind flayer in his eyes. Grog, as played by Matt, because Travis isn't there, throws his axe at one of the guards. Scanlan casts Lightning Bolt at the 2 basilisks, and the king attacks Scanlan after downing a potion that boosts his strength. Vex casts Hunter's Mark on the king, casts Conjure Barrage on the guards, and moves Trinket in toward the queen. Kima attacks one of the basilisks and takes it out before pivoting to face off with the king. The queen attempts to cast Stone Skin on herself, but Tiberius does cast Counterspell against her successfully. There's too many in this. Can't do it. Queen then casts Quicken to do another spell to shoot chain lightning at Vax, Vex, Scanlan, and Kima. Tiberius casts another fireball and also throws an ice knife to hit both the queen and the remaining basilisk. Clarota casts Dominate on his fellow mind flayer, successfully redirecting him against the queen. Keyleth unsuccessfully attacks the king with her scorpion's multi-attack. Pike casts see, it's still there. Pike casts Mass Cure Wounds on everyone but Grog. Percy takes 2 shots at the basilisk, and Tiberius turns fully into stone from the basilisk's gaze after being petrified. Kima does also get hit by the basilisk's gaze while the dominated mind flayer attacks the queen. Vax stabs the basilisk, I hate this word, in the eye, finishing it off, while Grog attacks the queen with a crit, and Scanlan unsuccessfully casts Suggestion on the king to make him do a headstand in classic Scanlan fashion. The king attacks Scanlan and Kima. Scanlan does fall unconscious, and Vex casts Hail of Thorns and a flaming arrow at the queen and the mind flayer, rolling a nat 20. Kima attacks the king with Divine Smite, but unfortunately turns into stone at the end of her turn from the basilisk's gaze. The queen successfully casts Dominate on Grog and then casts Disintegrate on the ceiling, releasing hot lava into the room. So Clarota grabs the petrified Kima in a very surprising move on Clarota's end to drag her out of the room toward the stairway. Keyleth casts Wind Wall to wrap it around the lava to cool and stop it for a moment. Pike heals Scanlan back to consciousness, and Percy shoots an ice shot at the lava to slow it down more, and then shoots the king with 3 more shots. The mind flayer, no longer dominated by Clarota, bamps out of there. Vax stabs the queen in the collarbone. The dominated Grog attacks Vax, and Scanlan swings his singing blade at the king, rolling a nat 20 and finishing it off, much to his own surprise. Trinket runs out of the room, and Vex shoots 2 arrows at the queen, but the queen does grab Grog and casts Dimension Door to escape the room with him in tow. The lava immediately starts pouring faster into the room, and it suddenly becomes a time challenge, and panic ensues. I love when Matt breaks out the hourglass.
Oh, yeah.
Pike gathers some basilisk blood into vials. Percy and Vax pull stoned Tiberius out of the room and into the stairway. Scanlan reads his bull strength scroll to increase his strength and helps Vex and Clarota carry Kima away. The whole group rolls a dexterity check to get down the stairs to the hidden trapdoor they initially entered the castle through. The lava does start reaching them though, so Keyleth casts Stone Shape on the door and also creates a stone wall to block off the exterior lava flow, but they still have to roll dexterity again as more of the interior lava splashes against them. Vax falls unconscious as a result. This is, again, a long, winding story of Vax and his foot.
Mm-hmm.
Pike starts to pull him out, and Trinket successfully frees the both of them. They realize that most of Vax's foot is melted away, and they heal him back up to consciousness, but his movement is reduced, and his stealth rolls at disadvantage for the foreseeable future. They do manage to reach a safe place to pause and breathe, realizing that the entire stronghold is now filling with lava, with the Queen and Grog now missing, and that's where they end the episode. So, what do we think about this half?
Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
A lot. And I hate the word basilisk.
It feels like the first half of this episode was more slow, and then all of a sudden it's just bam, everything happening at once. But also it was cool, after talking, listening to this part again after talking about last episode and realizing how much they've learned even from just earlier and start actually planning things and checking for traps and just that sort of quick on the feet learning and picking up things, and they actually are coordinated when they go in. Of course, there's a lot of, as per usual in Critical Role, there's a lot of unforeseen obstacles that come up, but they have an initial plan going in. They're not just running in all trying to do their own things, and like you said, even Clarota and Kima agreed. And it's really cool to compare with the first half of the episode when everything was so disjointed and out of control.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up, and I think this is what I noticed when it comes to metaphors and stories is there was a lot more character tension in the first half, and in the second half there was a lot more player tension.
Yeah.
And that was a really interesting switch because they do go in with a game plan this time around, but there is a lot of drama and cringeworthy stuff going on between the players.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing more embarrassing, I at least think, than squabbling or fighting in public. And they do a lot of it in this second half.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. Are there any stories or metaphors you noticed?
I think one of the things that I picked up on that I found really interesting was when Tiberius took the shape of the Duergar god, both as in the one time he actually goes along with everybody's plan is the time when he basically is acting as a god, and it really benefits in his favor, but also looking at that a bit more critically and realizing that falls, it's a common trope, but that when there's a sort of species or race or whatever that is seen as for lack of a better word, more primitive, then oftentimes it's seen as their religions and beliefs are seen as less valued and just more fake. Totally. And I think a lot of that is left over from colonialism and with indigenous cultures and religions, and how with Christianity being the mainstream religion, they saw indigenous religions, and still do to this day, several lots of people, as primitive and fake and just stories, and that the people are easily deceived and are gullible and all of these things. And again, this isn't like a new idea, so it's not as if like Matthew Mercer and the party are like deliberately pulling this fresh. They're just pulling from a long storied history of this same like lack of regard for like indigenous or other cultures and religions outside of the Western understanding.
Yeah, that is an excellent point. I hadn't even thought about that, but you're so right. Like when we do tend to encounter those more indigenous religions or indigenous beliefs, we tend to think of them as like myths more so than like the word of God, you know, like the story of Abraham is going to be viewed different than like the story of the serpent god that saved the world for some reason or another, you know? And I think that's fascinating that it shows up here as well. And I think Tiberius leans into that too, as a character. Like he becomes more vicious. He becomes less civilized, you know, and more primitive, for lack of a better word, rough around the edges. And the way that he yells during this whole exchange, like it's just so cringeworthy.
It really is. And just really, again, just like plays into all of this like disregard for beliefs that are different, and like this colonialism and the understanding that there are some cultures and beliefs that are more valid than others, which is something I think is something I know that like Dungeons and Dragons as a whole and the fantasy genre has done a whole lot of work in other areas to remove bigotry, but I feel like this is an area that, while there have been people talking about it for years, hasn't had as much work and attention. Like I've seen people talking about it, how a lot of the more like animalistic races are like indigenous coded and stuff like that. And like though Duergar are not more like animal, it's still falling under a lot of this thing, and which is sad to see and just something to be like critical and aware of. And
yeah, and as you were talking, I was even thinking about the difference how they approach religion in the context of the D&D structure in the second campaign versus the first campaign. Because I think the first campaign actually like taught them a lot about what you're talking about, is this variety of religious experiences that I don't think they expected as players. Like, especially once we get to the whole Vax arc with all of that, like it totally changed their point of view on how they interact with religions in this context. And you can see that as a result in how those characters in the second campaign show up, for lack of a better term, pre-religioned.
Exactly.
Like they already have pre-existing beliefs about these deities that exist in this world.
And I noticed that in obviously I'm not done the first campaign yet, but from what I've seen in comparison to the second campaign has a lot more nuance in terms of the culture and like which gods are quote unquote good or quote unquote bad and things like that.
Totally. And I think that a lot of that comes from Matt and how he presents them with these opportunities to interact with these pre-existing mythos that he creates in this homebrew world, because it's not all original pantheon that he's working with. He does grab from various reference material, but I think it's a lot of Matt's machinations.
And a lot of the times that's what D&D comes down to. Like we're presented with the source material, but it's up to like the DMs and the players and the people playing to choose what they pick and choose and how they present it. So even if there are, and I know there are like a lot of like racist elements to D&D, it's up to us as players and as dungeon masters to critically analyze what we may be communicating with what we are like portraying our world as, and how we can make sure that we are portraying it respectfully for everyone and not falling into these stereotypes that can further build to do real life harm to real life people.
And I'm even thinking about Pike's relationship, because she's arguably the most religious out of the group at this point in time, because she's the cleric, you know, she has to be religious kind of. But even she doesn't really know how to interact with her religious relationship either, especially with the mace in the previous half of this episode. Like, there are consequences to her actions, and even her internal debate about whether or not to shit on the bed, like Scanlon did. Like, Matt is like, dude, you're a like cleric. Like, what are you doing with your life here?
Yeah.
And even she has to start coming to terms with like, oh, this is what it means within this context, and I can't just treat it flippantly anymore.
I think that's something that they did really, really well in The Legend of Vox Machina with Pike's portrayal of her like struggle with her faith, is that it shows her feeling like she's not good enough because she likes doing things like swearing and drinking and all of the like less moral, for lack of a better term, shenanigans of the party. But when she actually does like meet her God face to face, she is told that it doesn't matter what path she chooses. It's just the intention, and it's not those actions that define whether or not she's being a quote unquote good follower of Sarenrae.
Yeah, totally. And like, I'm just seeing a lot of parallels in this second half to future campaigns. Like, I was noticing Sam's evolution as a player over the years, because I've been watching the EXU Calamity stuff that they've been putting out recently, and Sam's playing another bard in it.
Yeah.
And he's getting back to his delicious bardness, which we all love about Sam. He's such a good bard. But his comfort with playing the Calamity bard versus his comfort with playing Scanlon, at least at this point in the campaign, is like miles and miles and miles apart.
Oh yeah.
He comes into this initially as like, I'm a newbie, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what's going on, I'm just rolling some dice and singing some weird songs. Like, that's all I'm here for. But like, as time goes on, he gets more and more strategic, he gets more and more intentional, he gets more and more comfortable and confident. And then we see that just in stark contrast with his Calamity character now.
Yeah, it is really interesting to see that growth and that comparison, especially seeing like him return to a class that he is known for playing. And that's another thing, like one of the reasons why I have enjoyed, as I think I've spoken on before in previous episodes, having watched campaign 2 first and then going back to campaign 1, is seeing those roots and seeing that growth.
Yeah. And I haven't seen much of the discourse that's happening online with all of the Calamity content that they're producing at the moment, but I'm pretty sure that Sam is just playing like a version of himself as a character with his Calamity character.
It seems like that, especially in like the first episode, that moment when his character was doing an ad read, and it was obviously a callback to all of Sam's beloved and ridiculous ad reads that he does before each episode.
And all of his costuming that he's doing, like the shirt that he was wearing last night was just perfect. And like, it's just really interesting how many parallels we get between both the player and the character growth in this episode with future campaigns and future player choices and future characters. I think that's the most interesting part. But I also appreciated Matt's insistence on questioning Vax and Keyleth on their amount of uses for their abilities as well, because it seems like in these episodes everyone's kind of starting to gang up on Orion with his choices in the group. And so I really appreciated Matt being like, hey Vax, tell me how many times you can use Uncanny Dodge. Hey Keyleth, tell me how many times you can use Stone Shape, to kind of like not make it as obvious that Orion is the misbehaving
Yeah.
of the group.
It's a good way for Matt to not only like make sure everybody is being held accountable, but also to, which later shows like where Orion went wrong.
Totally.
Because there's a difference between like with Liam and Marisha, like beginning to pick up on like, oh yeah, I should keep track of that, and like growing and changing, and Orion, who just kept trying to get away with more stuff. And it really just highlights that difference, and also kind of protects like Matt and the rest of them from being called hypocrites for doing it, because it has been called out and acknowledged when other people do it too.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many times that Orion is starting to misbehave in the second half. Like, Sam and Orion are just like fighting at this point in time. And like, Sam's telling Orion to focus and not cast all the spells like he usually does. They're both yelling at each other. Sam's being extra sassy. Laura is even getting into it and being like, your turn is taking too long. Marisha is helping him count his dice. Like, all starting to get really heated at this point in time. And I actually looked it up before the call, and we still have 20 episodes to go with Orion.
Oh gosh.
We still have 5 months of in-game content to go through with his antics.
That makes me so exhausted to think about. I remember what it was like when I was at that part, like watching through it, and just how painful it got with each and every episode, especially close to the end, and realizing that we have so much left to dig apart with that. But also, I think, in addition to it being just exhausting and just like a oh man moment, it's a good way to kind of look and reflect and figure out exactly what it was that was the toxic behavior, and like think critically about this rather than just like jumping on a bandwagon because he's gone. And so we're able to like analyze and pull apart and realize, hey, Orion's not being a team player in this way, or he is cheating in this way, or he's causing tension in this way. And I think that can be really useful, not just in terms of like, so I've seen posts on Tumblr and stuff like warning people not to like jump on call out posts, because sometimes they're just like, there's no actual weight behind them. They're just trying to get a hold of like people's outrage and to direct it in a direction that they want it to go. And so like when you see things like callouts, you have to like do your research and think critically and think, do they actually deserve this? And so I think this is a good way that we can kind of go through that process with Orion, and also as a way for like us as D&D players to figure out, okay, what like behaviors are healthy for a D&D table and what are unhealthy. And it can be a good self-reflection moment of like, oh, do I have moments of doing this in my own game? And the answer may be no, the answer may be yes, but it's important to like not always assume that we're doing everything right in our own D&D games, and important to like constantly realize that there's a balance to be found to be playing true to your character, but also making sure that you're not ruining the game for everyone else. Like you have to find a balance with that. If your character is a character that likes to push buttons, you need to make sure that you are doing that in a way that is not causing strife with that. It might cause strife with the characters, but that should never leak into strife with the players.
Yeah, totally. And I'm so glad you brought up the whole call out thing. I'm actually Googling something real fast because I read a wonderful book recently called We Will Not Cancel Us by Adrienne Murray Brown. And she talks about this cancel culture that we've now kind of slipped into. And you're so right in terms of like this outrage bandwagon that so many social media platforms encourage as part of their engagement algorithm. They will actually prioritize posts that cause outrage in order to increase activity on their social media sites.
Yeah.
It is a definitive strategy that they use for their algorithms. And it has created this culture, this cancel culture, where we jump on these outrage bandwagons without realizing what exactly they're for, or the context, or the nuances. And like, I think Critical Role is teaching us how to navigate these complexities in a very non-threatening way too, because it is technically all pretend.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? Yeah.
And like, even the way that I think, and I'm sure we'll get into this in later episodes closer to the time when Orion does leave, but I think that the way that they did it was also that they had him exit was also very respectful and was done in a way to try to avoid causing drama. Like, I know that like the cast and crew like haven't wanted people to like say like too many negative things or like try to like pin this like, and that they wouldn't go into the details of why exactly. They didn't want to like feed into that. And so I think like they were making sure that, especially as they were gaining a whole audience way bigger and way faster than they ever expected to pay attention to the impact they were having and make sure that they weren't outcasting Orion. Totally. However, with his later actions, it was Orion who is outcasting himself by digging himself deeper and deeper.
He made himself the pariah.
Yeah, he sure did. But yeah, I think there's something to be said too about like, yes, I think that there are times when it is necessary to like bring it to a wider public just for people's safety. That like some people are not healthy to be around, but I think there's also times where if you have a personal conflict to like deal with that within yourself and not try to bring the whole internet in on that, and to do that as quietly and respectfully as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually brings me to the personal experiences that I took notes on, is like what personal experiences are coming to mind for us here. And it definitely reminds me of some leadership advice that I read once upon a time, and it's praise in public, criticize in private. And that's exactly like, that's why I think the second half is so cringeworthy for me, because it's a bunch of public criticism.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, like it's the most embarrassing thing. Like, I hate when people squabble or like fight in public places with everyone else to hear. It's like, it's almost like they want it to be a performance, you know? And for me, that's not the point of having tension or problems or discussions that you're having about the tension. It's the person to person dynamic that is more important to me.
Yeah, and that's very similar to like what I've been taught in my classes in doing like group work with kids and youth and stuff like that, is like, if there is somebody who is like causing trouble or like tension, to like talk to them separately about it. Don't like, obviously if there's a case of bullying, make sure that that is like shut down immediately and that nobody's getting hurt in the process, but also like trying to do it in a way of understanding that everybody has different places and issues that they're coming from, and everybody is deserving of compassion as long as that compassion is not leading to further harm of others. And to like, for example, if there is somebody who's causing problems, to like talk to them separately apart from the group and have a conversation about it. See, is there any, especially, I mean, this is in more of the case of like where like I would have a personal responsibility over this group, but like, is there any needs that they have that aren't being met, and like, is there a reason why they are behaving in this way, or do they just not realize that it's causing harm? But like doing that in a way where you can work through that with that person rather than making it a whole dramatic issue that will cause rifts and really kind of break apart the group in the end.
Yeah. And I love that you brought in that compassion aspect as well, because I was actually having a conversation with someone, I think it was actually yesterday, and one of my soapboxes that I can get on lately is about quoting old dead white men. Like,
yeah.
I'm so tired of people quoting old dead white men at me.
Yeah.
Even alive white men.
Yeah.
No, thank you. And so I was like on this roll soapboxing in this conversation about that. And this woman was like trying to convince me to have compassion for old white men because they were just products of their environments. And I was like, I don't know if I can.
Yeah.
I was like, so I brought up one of my favorite examples to use of like non-problematic old dead white men is Einstein, because he was actually way ahead of his time. He was still a product of his environment, but he didn't resort to racist, sexist bigotry. Like, he has a lot of progressive liberal stances that he talks about, even back in like 1940, you know? And I don't think being a product of the environment is an excuse for bigotry, especially if you then publicize that bigotry multiple times on multiple public platforms, time and time again. Like, let's have inspirational quotes from women of color from history.
Yeah.
Let's have inspirational quotes from living women of color. Like, I'd rather be inspired by that than giving me another Elon Musk quote.
Oh man. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it really, like, because there's a difference between being a product of your environment and being actively unlearning and working on things and having compassion for those mistakes, rather than somebody who is a product of their environment and as a result are actively causing further harm to marginalized communities.
Yeah. Or even like present people who are using past examples as non-problematic inspirations, and it's like, we can use other examples. Like, we don't have to rely on old dead white men.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's not as if what they are saying like doesn't have worth all the time. It's just that their voices are so often the ones raised, and there's so many voices who are saying similar things or saying things better or pointing out different things that are just ignored. And like, those old dead white men should not be the be all and end all of inspirational quotes. Like, it doesn't mean you have to stop using them altogether, but think critically of who you are using for inspiration and whether there's a diversity in that or whether you're just like falling back.
Because you're just perpetuating the problem.
Exactly.
You're not actively addressing, because then you are making the current environment a product of a past environment.
Exactly. And that's not where we are. We are in, of course, we're in our own current environment, which had its own problems that we need to unlearn, but there's no need to be dragging problems of the past and a past environment into the present when we're already past that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, again, this is why I love Critters. Because I feel like Critical Role has taught us this point of view of being like, look, there are amazing people of color NPCs available for us to fall in love with during these campaigns. There are amazing women characters for us to fall in love with during these campaigns. And the white men that we come across tend to not be problematic unless they're like the villains.
Exactly. And also they've been really making an effort, like, in recent years to really diversify their cast as well, because, like, I mean, where we are, it's just like everybody's white. But like, now we're having situations with, like, Abria got to GM last summer, and we have like Erica Ishii and Robbie Damon as like long-term guests, and like Exandria Unlimited in all of its constant like iterations is like giving lots of opportunity for different cultures and different people and people of color to have a place at the table and tell their stories, which I think is something that, because Matt is good at what he does, but he still is also a white man, and so he should not have the only sole young voice at the table. And so I think it's really great what they're doing, and I really appreciate, especially because like they are obviously choosing people who are like good storytellers and stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
not as if it's performative and we're like just putting random people in certain spots just to give the appearance of being progressive. They are bringing in people who are good at what they do and giving them chances to be seen and have the wide audience that they might not otherwise have.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that leads into the last question is, what are we being called to do now?
Yeah, I think just really look at, I mean, really anything that we do and just like whether, first of all, whether we are being diverse in our sources and inspirations and understandings. And second of all, are we doing that in a way that is genuine, or are we just trying to do it as performative?
Yeah.
Because there's a difference.
Totally.
Like, because there's lots of people who like posted a black square on their Instagram for Black Lives Matter, even though it actively harmed the cause because they wanted to show that they were in solidarity, and then have not spoken of it since it stopped being trending. And so it's just like, it's good to advocate and be an ally and diversify your sources, but you need to make sure that you aren't doing it just to get good ally points on the internet, or good ally points in real life. You need to make sure this is something that you are actively contributing to your own life, and aren't just doing it for the clout.
You're right. We are living through a perfect example of it right now because we are currently in June, Pride Month. Like, it's where all corporate logos all of a sudden become rainbow.
Yep. Even if they're actively donating to anti-LGBTQ causes, even though trans rights in the United States are reaching a scary, scary place of unacceptance. Especially when the corporations actually have the money to make the change and provide help to marginalized people, but they're just doing it for the clout so that they can be seen as a good corporation, not that good corporations exist.
Right. Like, slap a rainbow on it. We like the gays.
Yeah, but only for June. As soon as July happens, you will see no rainbows anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, I'm being called to set boundaries with people. Like, out of this whole experience, I was thinking about like all of the toxic work environments that I've been in over the years and where I stayed longer than I should have. And I'm like, man, and like, I've even had past partners in the past, like romantic partners, do the like squabbling and fighting thing in public, like in front of like cashiers. And I've always been like, why? So like, just being aware of setting those boundaries with people and be like, I'm not engaging with whatever is going on with you right now.
Yeah.
In the middle of Costco, we're not having this right now.
Yeah.
And like you said, being more aware of the like performative allyship too, and like how we navigate those, because I also think that that's a boundaries thing as well, and being like, no, I do not accept this. Like, I just look down at my desk and I have like a rainbow credit card on my desk. You know what I mean? It's like a perfect example of how these, because it can be insidious too, because it's so part of our common vernacular every day to pay lip service without really meaningfully engaging in it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot in this episode.
We're good at that.
We are. We're like
getting into these deep topics.
Totally. I mean, world peace. We have it right here, guys. So anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I can't think of anything. I think we've had a good conversation and covered a lot of bases as always.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we do. So these are really powerful things that we're talking about today. And audience, we definitely encourage you to share your own insights and stories and thoughts and feelings with us as well, because we'd love to know how Critical Role, the characters, the players, the plot lines have influenced you in your own lives. And special thanks to Petall again for joining me on this episode.
Thank you for having me.
Per usual. So next time we will be discussing Campaign 1, Episode 8, I believe, Part 1. And joining me is going to be Alyssa again. So I'm super excited to dive into it with her. And as always, I'm looking for co-hosts and guests if you're interested on coming on this podcast and sharing your own thoughts and perspectives and soapboxes that we tend to get on. So reach out to me via email or on Tumblr at Sacred Reading CR. I can't wait to chat with all of you. And in the meantime, please comment, like, subscribe, and share. Follow us on Tumblr at Sacred Reading CR for all the juicy updates. And until next time, may all beings be free. May all beings be peaceful. I've switched around that time. And always, always, always remember to love each other. Take care, guys.